All right, good morning. Welcome, everyone. We are at the 7th lesson of our study of Acts to the ends of the earth, and we're in the end of the second missionary journey of Paul, and this time Paul and Silas. So someone tell us what we left off. What happened earlier in this journey?
What I have at the end was that Paul was he was speaking to the Athenians, and we also talked about the
Sharon, you are muted and it won't let me unmute you, and I don't know why. In fact, I'm not sure. Oh, you're unmuted now. Say that again. Great. Thank you for saying so, and please say it again.
I did. I had to unmute myself, I guess. So in the end of my notes, it was where Paul was in Athens speaking to the Athenians. We also talked about the philosophers, Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. And how do you say that? Baronians were eager to learn about the message.
Yeah. So these are the cities he visited last time. He was in Thessalonica. There we talked about how he was turning the world upside down. And really, it's the gospel of Jesus Christ that's turning the world upside down, because it's shocking, it's radical, and its effects are far-reaching. He was run out of town, and he went to Berea. Great point. The Bereans were really studious. They looked through the Hebrew scriptures, what we would, the Old Testament, and that's how they found that the scriptures talk about Jesus. So that reminds us that the early church really did consider the Old Testament to be content about Jesus. So he was run out of town again, and he went on to Athens. In fact, they hustled him off and took him away for his own safety, and he ended up in Athens. We talked about the great philosophers there and all the different philosophies that he was speaking to, right? And so Paul was dragged into court for serious charges, and from there he made a defense that was also a sermon, and he spoke to each one of those philosophies and how the message of Jesus is really good news to those. Any other thoughts or comments from last week? Well, let's go on to Acts 1 through 9. Would someone read that, please?
Deanna, you meant Acts 18, 1 through 9, right?
Sorry, yes, I did. I don't know what I said, but that's what I meant.
After these things, Paul, 1 through 9. Did you say 1 through 9, Deanna?
Yes.
Okay. After these things, Paul departed from Athens and came to Corinth, and found a certain Jew named Aquila, born in Pontus, lately come from Italy with his wife Priscilla, because the Claudius had commanded all Jews to depart from Rome, and came unto them. And because he was of the same craft, he abode with them and wrought, for by their occupation they were tent makers. And he reasoned in the synagogue every Sabbath, and persuaded the Jews and the Greeks. And when Silas and Timotheus were come from Macedonia, Paul was pressed in the spirit, and testified to the Jews that Jesus was Christ. And when they opposed themselves and blasphemed, he shook his raiment and said unto them, Your blood be upon your own heads. I am clean. From henceforth I will go unto the Gentiles. And he departed and entered into a certain man's house named Justus, one that worshiped God, whose house joined hard to the synagogue. Does that mean it's next to it?
Yes.
And Crispus, the chief ruler of the synagogue, believed on the Lord with all his house, and many of the Corinthians, hearing, believed and were baptized. Then spoke the Lord to Paul in the night by a vision, Be not afraid, but speak, and hold not your peace. For I am with thee, and no man shall set on thee to hurt thee, for I have much people in this city.
Thank you. Okay, so let's see. Paul heads to Corinth. Okay, so this is now in the southern part of Macedonia, and it's across an isthmus. And this isthmus was a place where several Roman rulers, Julius Caesar, Caligula, and later Nero would try as well, had tried to build a canal across this isthmus. And the idea is that they would be able to sail through, but they had all failed. It was really a difficult engineering project, and it wasn't actually successfully completed until modern times. So there's the canal there now, but those who had tried to build it before weren't able to get it to work, to be built. And so they tried with slave labor, and it was quite a failed project. But because of that, everything funneled through Corinth, lots of trade, lots of travelers. And what does Corinth have a reputation for?
Says it was the political and commercial center of Greece.
Yeah, definitely. This is, every city that we've talked about had its own little personality and their pride. Some were Roman colonies and they were being proud of being Roman. But this is the most important city to date that Paul has been to. We're getting closer to the capital, and Corinth is a more important city even than some of the others that we visited. What else do they have a reputation for?
It was corrupt.
Yeah, corruption and vice, right?
Yeah.
This is, we've heard about how, it was a center for every kind of debauchery, and that to Corinthianize meant, can't remember, I think it had a meaning of carousing. And so, yeah, so he is in a very worldly city. Crossroads, a lot of trading wealth. It may be even that the city of Athens, in a little bit of propaganda, made an effort to increase the reputation of Corinthians for vice in a negative way. Maybe a little rivalry going on between those two. So Corinth, like some of the other cities we talked about, prided itself on being more Roman than Rome. And there was a temple to Caesar built around the time of Paul in the center of the city that was just a little higher than the other temples. And so this was a very, a prominent thing. And who does Paul meet in Corinth? And what do we know about them?
Aquila and Priscilla.
Yeah, what do we know about them?
Well, they're tent makers, same occupation.
Mm-hmm.
And that they'd come from Italy, sent out of Italy.
Yes,
And
what'd you say, Linda?
And they're Jews.
Yes, Jews and?
They're exiled from Rome when Claudius made all the Jews leave.
Okay, so they're Jews and they're believers in Christ, yeah. Right? These are disciples. These are Christians, we would say. Not, that word's not used yet here, but yeah, they were former residents of Rome. Well, that's interesting, because what has Acts told us about there being a church in Rome? right? Nothing. We don't, that hasn't been a part of the story. And so we don't know how, who planted it, how did it get there? It may have been people scattered from Pentecost. It may have been people scattered from the persecution of Stephen. Somehow, it just reminds us what a slice of the story of the early church we're getting, right? We get part of the story. It's too big for us to get all of it. And so we know here that there was a church in Rome. We don't know exactly much about it. Now, you mentioned Claudius exiling Jews. What happened with that? Anyone know what happened with that? And if not, we'll talk about it. We have just a little information about this. We have a letter from Claudius, or I'm trying to remember, I think it was repeated in Seconius, that says that there were repeated instigations among Jews over riots led by Chrestus. So the speculation here, like, who's Chrestus, right? And what would be causing uproar in Judaism with Chrestus? What could this be about?
Between the Jews and Christians,
Yeah,
Christ believers and Judaism.
Yeah, and we think he just got the name a little bit wrong. He's like, these are Jewish, they've got their own stuff going on, right? And so maybe the name a little bit wrong, and not led by Christ, but rather about who is the Christ, right? Who is Jesus Christ, and is he the Messiah, right? So this idea is that, like, there were repeated problems between Jews and Christians in Rome. Well, we have seen this in all these cities, right? Where they, like, some are going to get some bad characters and get a mob together, and they had a riot and they drugged them to the magistrates, and all these things are happening repeatedly in all of these cities. And it seems that this is also what happened in Rome, and Claudius was done with it and ordered the Jews to leave. Or we have another source that says, oh, he could have never done that. That would have been so difficult logistically. So they were just forbidden to meet. Well, and as a result, many left. So it's one or the other. Either he told them they had to leave, or he told them they couldn't meet, and so they did leave. And so the Jews were kicked out of Rome effectively in this time. And this idea of tent making, right? So Paul, even though he was trained as a Pharisee, even a rabbi would be expected to have a trade skill, right? And Paul seems to have been tent making, and he probably was practicing this all the time he was in Tarsus, and all the time that he was in Damascus. We have years in between there, right? Before he became a missionary full-time, that he was probably practicing this trade of tent making. And so he finds Priscilla and Aquila. Priscilla is the diminutive of Prisca. So you will sometimes see this written Prisca. It would be like Anne and Annie. So Prisca and Aquila, or Priscilla and Aquila. And they have the same trade. And so he sets up shop doing this trade with them. Questions or comments on this?
I have one question, and it's just kind of a technicality, I guess, but is at that time, back in that second verse, when it distinguishes between Rome and Italy, was Rome not a part of Italy then?
It was in the region of Italy. And so I think that I think those are used kind of synonymously.
Okay. I just wondered, it seemed like,
That's
most
not
recently
something
came.
I looked up from specifically, but I think they came from Rome in the region of Italy.
Okay. Thank you.
It's like Corinth is in the region of Achaia, and Thessalonica is in the region of Macedonia. Kind of, as we would distinguish cities now, even.
I think it's interesting that Priscilla is always named before Aquila. And I just found a note that said that she had a higher social position. And so she was always named before her husband.
Well, we have two possible speculations on that. So you notice, like, when they first introduced them, it says Paul met Aquila and his wife Priscilla. And then after that, it's always Priscilla and Aquila. And there's two possible speculations. One is their social position in the Greco-Roman world. The other is their kind of influence and strength in the church. And so it may be that Priscilla was doing much in the church. It may be that she was a leader, like, you know, we mentioned Lydia, we've talked about the prominent women. And so it may be that her leadership in the church was significant enough, and that's why she's named first. That is something that scholars notice and have commented on and wondered about. And so probably one of those two. Yeah.
It's probably not important. Just in those days, you would think the woman would not be named first.
Yeah, and it depended on the region, because women had a more a prominent role in society in Macedonia than in some other areas. And so, you know, it just, there's some variation in that. Like, we know that in most of these areas, like, if the men could vote, that didn't mean the women could vote. And that is true pretty much throughout. And yet, you know, we have women business owners, and, you know, so there's some variability.
Do I have heard that she might have been the preacher of the two? Do you know anything about
That's pure speculation, but it's
Okay.
interesting to think about, you know.
Mhm.
It seems, if we kind of try to approach these texts without preconceptions, we get more prominent roles for some women than we might expect to see. But you know, it doesn't ever mention her preaching. So,
Okay.
I mean, we have other prophetesses in the New Testament, but which would be a preaching role, a prophetess, a speaking role. But we don't know. And it doesn't say she is.
Okay.
So he starts working with them. And then what happens in verse 5 or verse 4 and 5? What's going on there?
Silas and Timothy show up from Macedonia.
Yeah, finally, we know that he was waiting for them in Athens. He had to leave Athens. He's in Corinth. And so he's been waiting a long time for them. And we think there's some, when we try to put this together with some of the letters, we think maybe Timothy had come to him and then gone back. And then because there were some messages that went back and forth. But now Silas and Timothy have finally arrived from the mainland of Macedonia across that isthmus. And they bring news of how the Thessalonian church has been doing, which we know from the letters to the Thessalonian church. And Paul was very relieved to hear that they were doing well. And so what has Paul been doing while waiting for them in verse 4?
Been teaching in the synagogue to the Jews and the Greeks.
Yeah, and you notice again, he's reasoning. That dialogue method of you know, giving evidence and discussion is what he's been doing. And what change does this make in his daily life for Paul and Timothy to arrive? Still in verse 5.
It says he was pressed in the spirit, and he testified to the Jews that Jesus was Christ.
Yes, yeah, and then right before that,
He devoted himself. I'm sorry. He devoted himself to that, to preaching.
right, exclusively, as compared to what?
Working during the week, I guess, to tent making.
Yeah, tent making to support himself. So this, you know, this is interesting, right? This tells us he has been tent making, therefore not had the time to devote himself exclusively to preaching before they come, right? And this tells us that he was maybe a little more alone in his ministry than he felt comfortable being. And we know from, if you read 1 Corinthians 9, we know that Paul felt he had a right to accept financial support from the Corinthians, but that he had decided not to. He made a judgment that it could hinder the gospel there. 1 Corinthians 9:12 says, nevertheless, we did not use this right, the right to be supported while they preach, but we endure all things so that we will cause no hindrance to the gospel of Christ. And then in verse 18 of 1 Corinthians 9, he talks about making sure that he can offer the gospel without charge. So in this city that is so focused on trade and wealth and vice, he has decided he cannot afford to not support himself for the sake of the reputation of the gospel. And that's why he's been tent making. And so when Silas and Timothy arrive, that gives him the support to, they're partnered up with him. Now he can devote himself exclusively to preaching. Questions or comments on that?
Well, does that mean that they were going to, were they tent makers also? I mean, were they going to do something to earn money?
Something, we think, somehow between all of them, they were able to support the work so that Paul could devote himself exclusively to preaching, but we don't have anything that says that they are tent makers. So it's something. Yeah. And so, you said that he testifies to the Jews that Jesus is the Christ, so the Messiah, the one that was promised, the anointed one that was promised to them through their scriptures. And so that's what he is preaching. He's saying, everything that God promised to you is answered. It's yes in Jesus Christ, as he says elsewhere. And the tensions get higher until the Jews who don't believe break out against him. And what does your translation say that the Jews do?
They became abusive. And
did yours say abusive?
And sick.
Blasphemed.
I was going to say blasphemed, yeah.
Yeah, those are the most common two translations. Literally, it's blasphemed, right? So this is not, when it says, to me, I think when it became abusive sort of implies that they were being mean, right? And maybe they were being mean, but that's not really, this is not really about them just saying insulting things to him, right? The word blasphemed is our clue. Remember when Jesus was accused of being in league with Beelzebub? This is in Luke 11:14. It's also in Matthew. He casts out demons by Beelzebub, the ruler of demons. And Jesus called that blasphemy. He said, when you say that the work of God is the work of demons or the work of the devil, that's blasphemy. And so it's likely that what the Jews were doing is a similar thing. If you say Jesus did all these things, then and we just don't believe that could be from God. It had to have been from evil powers. Couldn't have been from the divine, must have been from evil powers, right? So that's like tensions are running high, right? They're very upset. And Paul is also upset. And you notice what he says to him. He basically says, if you don't want the culmination of everything that God has been doing for you and through you all these generations, fine, right? And he leaves, right? Where does he go?
Oh, to
the synagogue, to a house named
Justus's house.
Okay, so Titius Justus's house. And how is it related to the synagogue?
Well, this is joined heart, so it must be next door, huh?
Yes, next door, right? So this is, Paul might have maybe given them a little extra space, but no, he is right next door. Titius Justus is a believer, and he's wealthy enough to have this house to offer, right? So we see it's the same thing again. Paul is done with the Jews. I'm done with them. Your blood be on your own head. And then he stays right next door, right? Even when Paul is done with them, He never gives up on the Jews, and he never lets bitterness towards anyone, these people that he's argued so fiercely with, prevent them from coming to believe, right? Because who believes next?
Crispus,
What
Crispus,
is his job? What is Crispus?
synagogue ruler.
Yes, the synagogue ruler, right? So there is this big party within the synagogue that says, that's how, we don't believe it, must be from the devil. And then the synagogue ruler, he believes, and what else?
His house, his whole
And for
house.
his household, yeah.
Whole household, right? What would this have been like in the synagogue community?
Very divisive.
They would normally have been a very tight-knit community, wouldn't they? These are Jews, they're set apart, they're living in a Roman world, a Roman culture. They don't eat with Greeks, they don't participate in any of the activities devoted to the gods or to Caesar that the Greeks participated in. They were their own separate community. And here they are split over Jesus. So this would have been a major incident in a substantial division in this community. And what keeps happening? What's happening next? Verse 8, end of verse 8.
More people believe.
So that would have, okay, tensions were high. It must be from the devil. Blood be on your own head. Go next door. Now he's still there. He's still in their face. He's still next door. The synagogue ruler believes. There's still a big party that doesn't believe. And then all of these Greeks are coming to believe. They're coming to participate in Judaism in a way that the Jews don't think that they should be allowed to. And they're not even being circumcised, and they're not obeying the food laws, and that they're coming and joining this Jewish movement. And so what kind of environment would this be?
Probably be pretty scary because, Paul had a vision that said, don't be afraid and keep on speaking.
Right.
So it probably pretty hostile.
Yeah, like when someone says, don't be afraid, it's always when you are
Afraid.
afraid.
Right.
Right? This must have been just a growing and growing hostility. And Paul must have been quite afraid. I think so. Yeah, and God came to him, and look at this word that he gets from the Lord. Someone read that out again.
Do not be afraid. Keep on speaking. Do not be silent. For I am with you, and no one is going to attack and harm you, because I have many people in the city.
So there are all these little pieces that call back scriptures from the Hebrew story, right? From the Israelite story. What do you see?
Well, God is guiding all of it and has a lot of people on his side.
Yeah. What Old Testament characters and the words that they got from God, what does this remind you of?
Moses was kind of afraid, and he didn't even want to do it. And so God had to send a person to speak for him.
Yeah.
And just going into the promised land.
Yeah. What did God say to Joshua?
I don't remember
Either. Don't be afraid.
Yeah, it's be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid. Be strong and very courageous is what God says to Joshua. So I think we're getting some little threads, some repetition of these phrases that are purposeful. God has worked in all these people through history, in Moses, in Joshua. We think about, for I am with you. That shows up in the Psalms, right? This is the word to David, that I am with you. And then who was told, he said, no, there's no one left. It's just me. And God said, no, I have many people. I have this many who haven't worshiped Baal. Who was that?
Elijah, I think, wasn't it?
It was. Remember the contest on Mount Carmel, and it depleted and exhausted Elijah, and he fled to the cave, and he said, I'm the only one left. And God said, no, I have many people. And so we get that same sort of word to Paul. I have many people in this city, right? So there are these threads of all these stories of these great prophets and leaders of the scriptures. And God repeats those to Paul, says, like, I've been with all of them through all these generations, and I am with you. So it's a very strong reassurance and comfort to Paul in this frightening and hostile time.
It occurred to me in studying this is a huge cultural shift. And you don't make huge cultural shifts in a week.
Yeah.
I think we're experiencing some of that. From the 60s till now, there has been a huge cultural shift, and it's very upsetting and very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And you keep questioning, is this right? Who's right here? Because you hear the arguments on both sides, and making that decision is not easy. And I'm sure these Jews were going through that same tumult of who's right.
Yeah, great point. Like, the Jews are like, this changes everything. This is never how we read the scriptures. That changes everything. And then also, how about the Greeks? How would they be experiencing this as they come to believe?
This is a new God.
Yeah. And all their old gods are nothing.
Yeah.
And the behaviors that were proper in worship of the old gods are now, we're supposed to consider morally wrong, and we're supposed to refrain from all of that in a society that's completely steeped in that.
Mm-hmm.
Extremely difficult life change to make. And we know when we read the letter to Corinthians, we know they did not know what they were doing, right? They had a lot to learn about the faith in the true God and the practice of that faith, right? So how long does Paul stay here?
A year and a half.
Yeah, so far, as best we know, this is the, yes?
A year and a half.
Yeah, so far that year and a half, this is, as best we know, is the longest he has stayed in one place so far, although he's gonna have some longer stints in the next. But what is he doing? What's he doing all this time? Teaching the word of God. Yeah. So he would have had to be starting from scratch with all of these Gentiles, trying to communicate the force, the sweep of the Israelite story that the Jews would know, right? When he starts with the Jews, they're starting from a basis of understanding something about the nature of God. Now, they missed some things about the nature of God, but you have the foundation, right? And with these Gentiles, he doesn't. And so, when he writes back to Corinth in his letters, he's trying to explain like the whole story of Israel, and he's talking about our father Abraham as he's talking to this mixed Jew and Gentile church. So he is narrating them into the story of the scriptures. He's bringing them in and teaching them how to be part of the people of God. And so this is a big change and a lot to learn. And all of this time he's spending preaching and teaching. Yeah. Thoughts or comments?
Deanna, I had one thought back when we were talking about how this would have affected them, being so divided, the church there, some believing and some not believing, and how divisive that would be. And it made me remember what Jesus himself had said, that, you're going to separate families, the mothers and the fathers and the brothers, I'm not, everybody is not going to be on the same page. He predicted that sort of thing.
Yeah. And I think that in the synagogue here, that was the situation, and it must have been very stressful on all of them, including on Paul. Yeah. Paul has a heart for Jews, right? He has a heart for those people. He has a heart for Gentiles too, but he never loses his heart for the Jews. And so I think that he would have found that split and that division very painful, and he would have wanted to keep working to convince all of them that Jesus was the Christ. Mm-hmm. Other questions or comments? Let's read 12 through 17. This is a very interesting little event.
When Gallio was proconsul of Achaia, the Jews made a united attack upon Paul and brought him before the tribunal, saying, "This man is persuading men to worship God contrary to the law." But when Paul was about to open his mouth, Gallio said to the Jews, "If it were a matter of wrongdoing or vicious crime, I should have reasons to bear with you, O Jews. But since it is a matter of question about words and names and your own law, see to it yourselves. I refuse to be a judge of these things." And he drove them from the tribunal, and they all seized Sosthenes, the ruler of the synagogue, and beat him in front of the tribunal. But Gallio paid no attention to this.
Yeah, okay. So this is, comparing with archaeology, this is a very interesting verse because Gallio came to be proconsul. He was moved from one place to be proconsul here in Achaia. Corinth is in the region of Achaia. And so we know that this must have happened around 51, 52 AD because that was the reign of Gallio that we have from these outside sources. So really nice to get a nice clear dating in there, right? Because we're always trying to speculate, okay, now what year was this and how can we put this in a timeline and how do we match it up with Paul's letters? And so that's nice to know. And you notice the way the Jews phrase this is a little different. What do?
This was a united attack.
Okay, with one accord.
Right.
So
and they phrase
which Jews were united in this? All of them? How about Crispus?
No, the ones who had gone against Paul and blasphemed, or
Yeah.
said that Paul was blaspheming.
Right. So that party has come together to oppose Paul. Yes. What else happens?
Well, they phrase it as if this is contrary, what Paul is teaching is contrary to the law.
Yeah, the law, right?
Yeah.
Meaning this wasn't an approved religion by Rome.
So they may be claiming, yes. And so when we get Gallio's ruling, what does Gallio say?
Your problem, solve it yourself.
Okay, if it's your problem, solve it yourself, which is, I like how he says, like, if this were a matter of vicious crime, I would deal with it. But this is about words and names and your own law. So what category does that put the Christian group in legally?
The Christian group.
The Christians, right? Paul's believing group. What category does that put it in? What was he saying that group is part of?
The Jewish movement.
The Jewish law.
Yeah.
Right. He's saying you're part of the Jewish, it's your own law. This is all a Jewish thing. And so then, legally, we've talked about how precarious the situation was where the Jews were the only ones who had this exemption from worshiping Caesar. So if you put the Christians as a subset of Judaism in this way, which it is, but the Jews are saying it's not, right? Or it's not a subset, but a fulfillment of Judaism. And so there's all of this words and names to think about. then legally, this is so important because it gives the Christians, the believers, Jewish believers and Gentiles who have come to join the Jewish believers, it gives them all this legal space, right, to not worship Caesar. So this is an extremely important ruling and would have been very, very beneficial to the Christians in this, region. This is just the force of this ruling doesn't count everywhere, right? He's proconsul of Achaia. This is the southern Macedonia region. And so it would apply there, not everywhere, but a huge advantage to Paul and the Christians and the gospel message in this area. Thoughts or questions?
I was thinking about that. This reminded me a little bit of Pilate. And if Pilate had taken this attitude, what might have happened with Jesus?
Yeah. Great point.
Didn't he try to have this attitude in the beginning? But then he turned it over to the Jews, Pilate?
Yeah, but he washed his hands,
He didn't want to judge him.
No, he didn't.
But he did. He did it. He did. Yeah, he tried to get out of it, but you think like, well, who's the ruler here? But yeah. Great point. So you notice who the synagogue ruler is. So the surrounding people, they're angry that a false charge has been brought. Once Gallio kicks them out and says, no, this is not a legitimate charge, then the city is riled up saying, oh, you've brought a false charge. And they drag out who and beat him?
Sosthenes.
The chief ruler,
The chief synagogue ruler.
Yeah, he's the synagogue ruler. So obviously the synagogue ruler has had a change. Right? Christmas is not the synagogue ruler anymore. That it sort of reinforces our sense of division that happened through the gospel message in the synagogue there. So new synagogue ruler, and the crowd takes it out on him for bringing this false charge. Let's look at verses 18 through 23, okay? So in verse 18, Paul, he stays on from Corinth and for some time. We know he stayed there a year and a half. And then he leaves there and sets sail for?
Syria.
Okay, so where's he going? If he sets sail for Syria, where's he going? What city?
Ephesus.
He goes to Ephesus next, but it's a stop on the way because if you remember, Syria is all the way at the end. Maybe I should bring up the map, actually. I think that would be other ideas while I pull up this map.
Is he on his way to Jerusalem?
So
Antioch.
Okay. Antioch is in Syria, Syrian Antioch. Of course, there are two Antiochs because we just have to have a lot of cities named after you when you're an important guy like that. Let me do a little share screen with you. Pull up this. Okay. So you see here from this map that, I'm zooming in just a little bit. Okay. Paul has been in Corinth here. Here's our isthmus we've been talking about. Ephesus, we see from the next verses, is his next stop, but where he's going is Syria. See, so here's Israel and Jerusalem down at the eastern sort of edge of the square. If you sort of picture the Mediterranean Sea as roughly a rectangle, then at the eastern edge of it is Israel and Jerusalem, and up here at the corner is Syria. And so when he set sail for Antioch, he's going home. He's going back to the home church that commissioned him and sent him on these. So he is setting sail for home here. And he makes a stop, right? So this is just the Aegean Sea. He goes from Corinth, and you have to go, Centuria is the little port, and he goes across and they stop in Ephesus. This may have been a supply stop, or it may have been a changing ships. You know, maybe some ships are going just back and forth across the Aegean Sea, and this is a longer haul voyage to the to get to Syria. So they stop in Ephesus, but his destination is to go back to Antioch. What happens there in Ephesus when they stop?
He shaves his head.
Okay, yeah, he does. Why does he do that?
Made some kind of oath or a vow.
Yeah, this kind of practice was quite common among the Jews in this time. They would do kind of a temporary version of like a Nazirite vow, and it was a time of fasting and prayer, and then they would cut their hair, and there was an offering. And so Paul seems to have made one of these vows, and we might speculate that that happens during his time of fear, before he gets this vision, or when he gets this vision in thanks, or, you know, this is a high stress time for him, and he must have been really seeking the Lord through this. And so he continues in these Jewish practices. This is normal. These are his ways of seeking God, and he continues in that. And so there was this vow, and because of that, he cut his hair. And Centuria, that's a little port city that I pointed out. And then they arrive in Ephesus. And what happens in Ephesus?
He goes to the synagogue again.
Yeah, again with the synagogue. And they want him to what?
To stay.
Yeah, they
Spend
want
time with us.
It's so surprising to me that Paul didn't say, yes, yes, yes. You want more? I've got more for you. Why do you think he might have left instead?
Maybe he felt comfortable with what they were doing.
Okay.
And also, didn't Priscilla and Aquila stay there?
He did. So I think that he had someone that he really trusted to leave there, and that made a difference. And Paul, it seems, felt compelled to go. Why might he feel compelled to go? How long's he been gone?
At least a year.
At least a year.
Probably almost two years by now.
It must have been, right? Because, you know, we already talked about Athens and Berea and Thessalonica going, you know, in reverse order. And then before that, he had gone through the cities of Galatia, right? So he's been gone a very long time. I wonder if he felt that he really needed to be back in Antioch. That was the church that had commissioned him. He may think that they're worried about him. He may feel that he needs to spend some of his ministry with them as well. Remember, he and Barnabas ministered there for some time before they were commissioned to go out. So I think that he was set sail for home. They stop in Ephesus, and he still wants to get home, right? Or, you know, maybe home is Jerusalem, but this church that has sent him. Yeah. Any other thoughts on that?
On this, Deanna, it says he bade them farewell, saying, I must by all means keep a feast that comes in Jerusalem, but I will return again to you. In 21. So what?
That is a textual variant that is not in my version. So there are multiple, and this happens all the time. This is normal. We have the really good thing about scripture, the scriptures that we have, is we have so many manuscripts. It's the most well-attested ancient documents that we have, but there are these normal variations that come up where a piece will be in a later version. Are you in the King James?
Yes.
So the King James was translated from, I think, the Latin Vulgate, Jerome's Vulgate. And so we have older manuscripts. And so when things like that appear in the King James, they don't appear in the other versions. It's because they're not in the earlier manuscripts that were discovered, you know, that were used in modern translations. So, we know that there was some of that going on, and we know later, this is the time that he seems to have decided to, that he needs to support Jerusalem with financial contribution along in this time. And so all of that may be driving him.
And I was going to say that I also think that he just, how we get homesick for home, and he had been gone away for so long, but I'm sure he just needed to draw on some encouragement also, and to see how things were going there, and kind of get a pulse on what's been happening. Has it been growing? Is it stagnant? All those questions he probably had in his mind. And with all the turmoil that was going on currently, he was probably just needing to get an idea of how things were going elsewhere to draw on some encouragement, hopefully, like just being hopeful.
Yeah, I see that as well. Yeah, I think, I mean, we're guessing when we're putting in options in there, and yet I think just judging by Paul's work ethic, he would have normally stayed, and so I think he really felt drawn to get back to Antioch and to see the brothers there, and maybe be ministered to as well. And he has these partners, Prisca and Aquila. This relationship must have meant so much to him, that he had these people that he could count on when he had nobody else. Found his tent maker. Have you ever gone someplace and just said, like, oh, I found my people? We spent a summer in Edinburgh, Scotland, and it was great. And we went to several churches over the time that we were there, and some of them, we were trying to find places nearby. We didn't have a vehicle. We were on public transit, and there were all of these, beautiful Scottish kind of cathedral, Anglican, the Scottish branch of that there. And so we went to some of those, we went to some services at those, and we went to, there was a Baptist church nearby that we went to, and it was great. It was good to worship in all these different places. But after a while, we just decided, let's try this. And we took 2 buses and a half a mile walk to the outskirts to go to a Church of Christ there in Edinburgh. And immediately we came in, it's like, oh, we found our people. These are, I can't describe to you what a feeling of home it was to find your people. It had such a warmth and a feeling of connection. And, when we'd been at these other churches, the kids were just like, they were just there. They were next to us. And within minutes of going into this church, they're running around the building with the other kids, and we're like eating the cookies. And, it just was such a feeling of home. And I think maybe that's how I imagine Paul when he finds Priscilla and Aquila, and he's tent making with them, and they're believers, and he trusts them, and he can leave them behind. That partnership, what a joy. Interesting thing that happens next with Priscilla and Aquila, and I see we're going to run out of time today, and I thought we might, and that's okay, because this is a good place to wrap up. Meanwhile, right? So Paul sails off, and meanwhile, what happens in Ephesus, verse 24?
Apollo is a native Alexandrian, and he arrives in Ephesus, and he is a person who was baptized by John's baptism. And so he speaks about that baptism, and he speaks about John's message, but he has to be taught by Priscilla and Aquila the other way, the perfect way.
Yeah. So native of Alexandria, that tells us something, right? That's a center of learning with a large Jewish population. Think Alexandrian library, think the translation of the Septuagint. And so Apollos is a very learned guy. And it seems that the very thing that Paul had been teaching all this time, that you can see the coming of the Christ, and that Jesus fulfills these promises of messiahship in the scriptures, that Apollos had seen it without knowing Jesus. And so he knew of John's baptism. It says he spoke of Jesus accurately, even though he didn't know Jesus. And so it's this great situation where he is a little bit unique in that, like, he is expecting the true Messiah out of the scriptures, that so that when Priscilla and Aquila are able to say, here, this is it, the thing that you are teaching, it's here. We have Jesus. He's available to you. And so, that had to have been a time of great discovery and joy. And Priscilla and Aquila, we think God put them there for that purpose. And so Apollos learns the way more perfectly. And then where does he go next?
Went to Corinth.
Yeah, back to Achaia. He has the region of Achaia, which is where Corinth is, exactly. And he seems to be very helpful to the church there as well, which we know from the Corinthian letters, that church needs a lot of help. So we're glad he is there. And meanwhile, while Apollos is at Corinth, Paul is going to set off for, he spends time in Antioch with his church home there, and then he sets off on another missionary journey, and he'll come back to Ephesus. And so next week we will pick up at the beginning of chapter 19 about his time in Ephesus, and we'll try to get all the way through the end of this third missionary journey in Acts 20:38. We'll see. But that'll be our goal, is to cover that next week.
Deanna, there's just one quick thing here that it is, I like the way it said, they were talking about Apollos, he mightily convinced the Jews.
Mightily, yeah.
Strong.
Vigorously refuted the Jews is what the NIV says. I'm going to check the NASV. Powerfully refuted the Jews. Yeah. It was a strong work from a clearly intelligent and well-educated man. A few people speculate that he's the writer of Hebrews. We really don't know who the writer of Hebrews is, but it could be Apollos. One idea. Yeah, I think this lesson really spoke to me in terms of reassurance and partnership, right? God is providing Paul with these people that can partner with him, and he is providing the church with servants that they need, that can go back to these other places. And really, God is at work spreading the gospel and encouraging his ministers, right? Don't be afraid. I am with you. I have many people. And we need that message, don't we? We are not alone. God has many among us. And in turmoil, times of turmoil, right? That's the message that we need, the partnership that we have with one another and with God in the work of Christ in the world. Thank you, everybody. I'll look forward to our lesson next week.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Deanna. You just really bring out so much that we wouldn't know just by reading,
Mhm.
Judy Alley has our prayer today. Are there any